You better not join us. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the words burning themselves into my memory. It was a Tuesday morning, the kitchen quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. The text was from my daughter Sarah. It was followed quickly by another message. "Sorry, Mom, that was meant for Greg," about his annoying cousin. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. I was 64, a widow of 4 years. And I wasn't stupid. Greg's cousin lived in Seattle and hadn't traveled in a decade. No, that text was about me. It was about the week-long luxury resort trip to the Bahamas that I had paid for. The trip that was supposed to be a family getaway. The trip where Sarah had been making subtle excuses for weeks about why my booked excursions might be too tiring for me. I set my mug down on the granite counter. I didn't cry. I didn't call her to demand an explanation. I didn't ask her why she was treating me like an unwanted piece of luggage. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over my chest. I had spent years making things easy for Sarah and Greg. I had smoothed over their rough patches with my checkbook. I picked up my phone and typed a single word in reply, "Understood." Then I walked into my home office, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. I navigated to the credit card section. I clicked on the 2 cards I had issued in Sarah's name as authorized users, the ones funding the flights the hotel holds and the daily expenses. I didn't pause. I clicked Report Lost/Stolen and permanently closed the secondary accounts. The bank confirmed the action immediately. I closed the laptop and looked out the window at my garden. They were flying out on Thursday. I wondered how long it would take for reality to hit them, to understand why I didn't hesitate. You have to understand the last 4 years. When my husband Arthur passed away, he left me financially secure. He was a careful man, and we had built a comfortable life. Sarah, our only child, had always been a bit spoiled. But after Arthur died, her reliance on me shifted from occasional help to steady expectation. It started small. She would use the emergency credit card for a massive grocery run, claiming Greg's commission check was late. Then the groceries turned into spa appointments, a weekend getaway, a set of premium golf clubs for Greg. Whenever I brought it up, she would sigh, rolling her eyes as if I were being unreasonable. "Mom, we're just stressed. You know how hard things are right now." I never argued. I observed. I watched as Greg drove a leased car he couldn't afford, while Sarah complained about the cost of living from the comfort of a leather sofa I had bought them. I kept quiet because I wanted to keep the peace. I thought if I supported them, they would eventually stabilize and appreciate it. This Bahamas trip was supposed to be different. It was the anniversary of Arthur's passing, and Sarah suggested a family retreat to honor him. I paid for the flights, the resort suites, everything. But as the date approached, her tone changed. She started talking about how they needed couple time, and how I should probably just relax by the pool while they went out. She was pushing me to the margins of a vacation I was funding. The text message wasn't a mistake. It was just the quiet part, said out loud. Thursday morning arrived bright and sunny. I watered my ferns completely at peace, waiting for the inevitable phone call. The phone rang at exactly 2:15 p.m. They would have just arrived at the resort in Nassau. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. "Mom!" Sarah's voice was high-pitched, echoing against what sounded like a busy hotel lobby. "Did you do something to the credit card? The front desk is trying to run the hold for the rooms, and it's declining. They won't give us the keys." I adjusted my reading glasses and turned a page of my book. "I canceled it, Sarah." Dead silence on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of steel drums playing in the background. Finally, she sputtered, "What? Why would you do that? We are at the front desk. You need to call your bank right now and authorize it. We look like idiots." "You sent me a text on Tuesday," I replied, keeping my voice entirely neutral. "You said I better not join you." I replied that I understood. Since I am not joining you, I am not paying for the trip. It seems fairly straightforward. Mom, I told you that was about Greg's cousin. She yelled, her panic stripping away any pretense of politeness. I don't have time for this. Sarah, I stated, you wanted a trip without me. You have it. Enjoy the Bahamas. Mom, wait. You can't just leave us here. We don't have the limit on our own cards to cover this. Mom? Goodbye, Sarah. I tapped the red button and set the phone on the coffee table. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I felt light. But as I sat there, I realized that cutting off the vacation fund was only the first step. They had taken my silence for weakness for far too long. If she thought this was just about a hotel bill, she was about to learn a very hard lesson about independence. For the next hour, my phone vibrated constantly. Sarah called 6 times. Greg called twice. I simply muted the device and walked into the kitchen to make myself a sandwich. As I spread mustard on my bread, a thought occurred to me. If they were standing in a foreign lobby frantically trying to call me, they were using their cell phones. Phones that I suddenly remembered were still on my family plan. Years ago, Sarah had convinced me it was cheaper to bundle our lines. I had been paying their portion ever since an automatic deduction that just blended into my monthly expenses. I left my sandwich on the counter and returned to my laptop. I logged into the cellular provider's portal. There were 3 lines listed: mine, Sarah's, and Greg's. I didn't cancel their lines completely. I wasn't trying to destroy their phone numbers, but I used the feature designed for lost devices. I suspended their service. With a few clicks, their data and cellular access were instantly cut off. Unless they were connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, their expensive smartphones were now just heavy pieces of glass. I logged out and closed the laptop. The silence in my house felt different now. It didn't feel lonely. It felt secure. I was no longer an invisible safety net they could trample over. I was a homeowner, a widow who had survived the worst grief imaginable, and I was done being managed by my own child. I finished my lunch and decided to do some gardening. I was pulling weeds near the front porch when the landline in the kitchen began to ring. Hardly anyone used that number anymore. I wiped my hands on my apron, walked inside, and looked at the caller ID. It was an international number. Greg had found a way to reach me, and I was curious to hear what he had to say. I picked up the receiver. Hello. Bethany, what the hell are you doing? Greg's voice was loud, echoing slightly. He was calling from a landline, likely the hotel concierge desk. He dropped the fake respect he usually wore around me. We are stranded in this lobby. Sarah is in tears. You need to fix this right now. I don't need to do anything, Greg, I answered calmly. You are 2 adults in your 40s. You can figure out your own accommodations. We can't, he snapped. Our cards are maxed out, and my parents are exhausted. They've been sitting in the lobby for 2 hours. I froze. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear, processing his words. Your parents. Greg realized his mistake instantly. He stumbled over his next words. I mean, they just happened to. You invited your parents on the trip I paid for. I concluded the final puzzle piece, snapping into place. That was why Sarah didn't want me there. They were using my money to fund a luxury vacation for Greg's family. I was just the wallet meant to stay home while they played big shots for his parents. Bethany, look. Greg tried to pivot, adopting a patronizing tone. We just wanted some quality time with them. You know how you get. You're always so quiet. We didn't want to make you uncomfortable. I actually laughed, a short, dry sound that seemed to unsettle him. You didn't want to make me uncomfortable, I repeated. Well, I appreciate your concern, Greg. Since you are the man of the house, I'm sure you will figure out how to pay for your parents' vacation. Have a wonderful week. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt entirely liberated. They had shown me exactly who they were. Now it was my turn to show them what that meant. That evening, I poured myself a glass of red wine and sat down with my master bank statements. The revelation about Greg's parents had removed any lingering hesitation. I had been paying for a lifestyle they felt entitled to while they treated me like an embarrassing secret. I went through the last 3 months of bank activity line by line. It was astonishing how many of their expenses had rooted themselves in my accounts. The auto insurance for Greg's leased SUV, the premium streaming services, the monthly fee for a high-end gym they rarely visited. It was a slow, steady leak of hundreds of dollars every month. I didn't call lawyers. I didn't need to threaten them or cause a scene. I just needed to take back my property. I logged into every single account. I removed my payment methods. I canceled auto-renews. I changed passwords on the streaming services and logged out all connected devices. By 9 p.m., I had completely financially untangled myself from my daughter and her husband. If they wanted to drive, they would have to pay their own insurance. If they wanted to watch movies, they would have to subscribe themselves. I slept better that night than I had in 4 years. The phantom weight I had been carrying, the constant low-level anxiety of supporting ungrateful adults, was gone. The next morning, I woke up early. The Bahamas trip was supposed to last a week, but without my credit cards, I knew they would be scrambling. They would likely have to borrow money just to book flights back. As I drank my morning coffee, I looked at the spare bedroom down the hall. Sarah treated my house like her personal storage unit. And worse, she had a key. I realized there was one final boundary I needed to secure before they returned. Sarah had held a key to my house since she moved out in her 20s. Recently, she had taken to letting herself in while I was out borrowing bulk pantry items, taking my good wine and leaving her out-of-season clothes in my spare room. It was my house, but she treated it like an extension of her own property. At 9 a.m., I drove to the local hardware store. I bought 2 heavy-duty deadbolts and a new handle for the front and back doors. I didn't hire anyone. Arthur had taught me how to change a lock years ago. It took me less than an hour with a screwdriver to swap them out. The heavy metallic click of the new deadbolt sliding into place felt incredibly satisfying. Next, I went into the spare room. Sarah had stacked 4 large plastic bins of designer winter clothes and shoes in the corner. I grabbed a roll of packing tape, sealed the bins properly, and dragged them one by one to the front porch. I added the expensive espresso machine she had bought with my card and stored here because it didn't match her kitchen counters. I stacked everything neatly by the front door. My house was finally entirely mine again. I spent the rest of the weekend reading, gardening, and enjoying the quiet. I knew they wouldn't last the week in the Bahamas. Without my funding, the resort would have forced them out. On Monday afternoon, I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for a stew when I heard a car engine rev aggressively in my driveway. I looked through the window. It was Greg's SUV. They were home 4 days early, and they looked absolutely furious. The real test was about to begin. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the entryway. Through the glass panels, I watched Sarah storm up the steps, bypassing her plastic bins entirely. Her face was flushed, her vacation tan looking patchy and angry. Greg followed closely behind, carrying a cheap duffel bag, his jaw set in a tight line. Sarah didn't knock. She shoved her key into the lock and twisted. It didn't turn. She jiggled it, cursed loudly, and tried again. When it still didn't work, she started pounding on the heavy wooden door with the flat of her hand. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. "What is wrong with your lock?" Sarah demanded, trying to push past me. I didn't move. "I changed them," I answered. She stopped staring at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. "You what? Why? And why is my stuff sitting on the porch?" "Because it's my house, Sarah, and this is not a storage facility." I said calmly. Your bins are right there. You can load them into Greg's car. Greg stepped up, puffing his chest out slightly. Bethany, this has gone far enough. Do you know what we had to do? We had to borrow $3,000 from my parents just to pay for cheap flights home. We spent 2 days in a motel by the airport. You completely humiliated us. You humiliated yourselves, I replied, my voice steady. You tried to use my bank account to fund a vacation for your parents, and you excluded me from it. I simply removed my money from the equation. Sarah's face contorted. You are being incredibly petty, Mom. You ruined our trip. No, I corrected her. I stopped paying for it. There is a difference. Sarah glared at me, breathing heavily. She was waiting for me to crack to apologize, to offer a check to smooth things over. When I just stood there, she pulled out her ultimate weapon. If you don't fix this right now, Sarah yelled, pointing a finger at me. If you don't turn our phones back on and pay us back for those flights, you are never seeing us again. You can forget about family dinners. You can die alone in this big house. Greg nodded behind her, looking smug. They thought this was the kill shot. They thought my fear of being alone would override my self-respect. I looked at my daughter. I saw the entitlement in her eyes, the complete lack of remorse. That is your choice, Sarah, I said. But let me be clear. The car insurance is canceled. The phones are off. The credit cards are shredded. I am no longer your backup plan. If you want to cut ties because you can't use my wallet anymore, then you know where the driveway is. Her mouth fell open. She had no script for this. I wasn't arguing, I wasn't crying, and I wasn't begging. Take your boxes, I instructed, looking at Greg. You're crazy, Sarah whispered, stepping back. You're actually crazy. I'm finally thinking clearly, I replied. I stepped back inside and looked at them one last time. Drive safely. I shut the door. I turned the new deadbolt. Through the wood, I heard Sarah yell in frustration. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my knife, and went back to chopping vegetables. A few minutes later, I heard the heavy thud of the bins being thrown into the SUV, followed by the screech of tires as they reversed out of my driveway. The house fell completely silent. 2 months passed. The transition wasn't without its bumps, but the peace was worth every moment of it. Without the constant drain of Sarah and Greg's lifestyle, my finances were healthier than they had been in years. I heard through a mutual family friend that Greg had to return his leased SUV because they couldn't afford the insurance or the payments without my monthly gifts. Sarah had to take on extra shifts at her job to cover their new phone plans and the debt they owed Greg's parents. They were finally living the reality of the income they actually earned. Sarah tried to call me once from a new number. I let it go to voicemail. She left a clipped message saying she was willing to talk if I was ready to apologize. I deleted the message. I loved my daughter, but I refused to buy her affection anymore. If she ever wanted a relationship based on mutual respect, she knew where I lived. But until then, my door remained locked. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I sat on my back patio, sipping coffee. My laptop was open in front of me, but I wasn't checking my bank accounts or canceling cards. I was looking at a travel website. My friend Helen had mentioned she always wanted to see the Tuscan countryside. I clicked on a beautiful villa with a vineyard and booked 2 tickets. First class. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't a bank, an ATM, or a forgotten widow. I was just Bethany Woods, and I was exactly where I wanted to be.